Commissioner Peirce, welcome. It is wonderful to have you here this morning. It's been a busy time on the trading front with several important developments that directly affect the buy side. The SEC has been extremely active in this space, proposing sweeping changes to trade transparency and how data flows from exchanges to the public, and also addressing how securities information processes, or SIPs, should be governed. And I know that you have views on all of these issues and how they affect investment advisors. So we are very much looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us this morning. But why don't we start with some thoughts on the impact of the COVID pandemic on the markets? How do you think the markets have operated overall over the last few months? And I'd also be interested to hear whether there were any developments that stood out to you on the operations front or that surprised you in any way, either good or bad.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks, Karen, for that nice intro. Gail, congratulations on your 3rd year anniversary. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I have to give my standard disclaimer, which is that my views represent my own views, not necessarily those of the commission or my fellow commissioners. So it has been a very challenging time in many aspects of life, and I think COVID has certainly impacted our markets, as you all know. But I've been quite impressed at how well the markets have operated during a time of such stress on so many different fronts. People are facing the stress of having to move and work from home. They're facing just tremendous uncertainty about what this means for our economy and the economies of countries all over the world. And obviously concerns for individual health and family issues, trying to deal with educating children at home. And amidst all that, we saw the markets really functioning well on really high volatility. And so to me, that was really good to see. And I think it's a kind of stress test that no one wants to have, but the market, I think, passed that stress test with flying colors. We've tried to provide relief where it can be helpful, but it is clear that the thinking that went in ahead and developing business continuity plans and those kinds of things has paid off. And I think we've probably learned lessons from this that we'll then take and continue to make our system even more robust. The markets obviously had some moments that were exciting, maybe one would say. And markets that normally work quite smoothly had some issues. The Fed obviously came in a lot of markets, and so it's difficult to know what would have happened in the absence of that. But I think we have some lessons to learn and things to think about in terms of, particularly in the fixed income markets, modernization in those markets, I think would be quite helpful to make pricing easier in times like this.
So how do you think specifically the various mechanisms that were deployed on the exchanges to address the market early in the crisis, how do you think those work? So I'm thinking about the triggering of circuit breakers leading to the market halts.
Well, I think that those tools, which we saw obviously being deployed multiple times, worked quite well. I do think that we need to do a look back and ask whether there need to be any adjustments. For example, we saw some of those circuit breakers trigger very, very early in the trading day. And I think there's a fair question to say, well, if people have had the overnight to think about things, is the function of the circuit breaker really to stop trading at that point, or should we maybe have a different trigger for when the circuit breaker actually triggers? I think those are questions we need to ask. But overall, I think that they seem to work as intended. Trading resumed well, and so I think those are all positives. But certainly, I would love people's feedback about how we can make further adjustments to make sure that they'll work even better if they need to be triggered again.
So I know you had a lot of conversations with firms about how the work from home environment has affected them, and you spoke a little about what I call the human impact on remote working. But do you have any observations and broader themes around the trading impact of remote working?
Well, I
Or
think
the
one
impact on
impact
trading?
is that, yeah, I think one concern that I have is that when people are in this situation, whether they're not in the office, they don't have all the equipment that they normally have. Some people do, but not everyone does, and there's just uncertainty. I worry that people aren't as willing to take on positions in the market for fear that they're going to have trouble getting out of those positions later. And so I think there's a little bit of reticence, and I think that showed up some in trading during those in March specifically. I think you saw some of that going on. It's a little bit hard to know what's happening. You're guessing about what people's psychological reactions are, but it is more difficult when you're spread out like that and when you're away from the tools that you know so well and that work so well for you in the office.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we could spend the whole day talking about COVID, but I think we should move on to some of the substantive developments that have been going on at the Commission. And one actually big development relating to the Commission happened just this week. The Court of Appeals here in DC issued a ruling that overturns, one of the big steps that the Commission took to try to address conflicts of interest in the markets relating to trading. So on Tuesday, the court held that the SEC does not have or did not have statutory authority for its transaction fee pilot that it adopted in late 2018. And as you know, the buy side for years has pressed the SEC to address trading-related conflicts. So I am wondering whether you can share any thoughts about the court's decision and where you would like to see the Commission go following this decision.
Yeah, well, it certainly was a decision that we all read quite closely, and I think it probably disappoints a lot of people in the sense that we actually had quite a bit of support for the transaction fee pilot. I think a lot of people are concerned about the issues that we were trying to get at with that pilot, but these are complicated issues and there are a lot of different ways to get at them. And so if the transaction fee pilot is not the way to get at them, we have some other things in the works, as you know. And so we have different roads we can go down. I think that a pilot like that could have provided us data that would have been very helpful in thinking about these issues. But as the court said, that wasn't enough for us to move forward. So I certainly respect what the court said on that, and I think we can explore some of these other avenues that we're working on and see how things change when we make changes in those areas. And I think you'll hear from Brett later today, so you can get some further color on where the division is, what the division is thinking in light of the decision.
Yeah, so let's go down one of those avenues and talk about what we're all calling Reg NMS 2.0. And I'd like to touch on first the proposal on market data infrastructure that came out in February. And this is the first proposal related to market data infrastructure since Reg NMS was adopted in 2005. And just to give folks a bit of background, the proposal would expand the data that would be required to be distributed to the public through the consolidated tape. And it would also decentralize the way that market data is collected, consolidated, and transmitted. And the comment period has run, and I know you've received a very large number of thoughtful comments. And as we just talked about, from the buy side's perspective, firms have been interested for a long time in reforms that would address conflicts of interest in the markets and that would also address increased transparency around trading information. So this is a proposal that you supported, and can you speak a little bit to how you think it would address these concerns and other concerns that have been expressed in this area?
Well, so I think it was time for us to look at the area, and I mean, I think it's one that was really in need of modernization. We see that the value of the SIP, I think, has degraded over time as people found that they need to get other data feeds. And that's natural. It's always going to happen. Some people are going to feel that they need more data than other people. But when we're seeing so much of the market feel that the SIP is not sufficient, that I think leads to the question of what do we need to do to make it more useful to people. And that's the genesis. So that's the goal of the infrastructure proposal. And then trying to figure out better ways to get data to people, consolidated data to people. We did get a lot of comment on it, and I haven't had a chance to read all of the comment letters, but I have read some of them, and they're very, people feel very passionately in this area. That is one thing. People have very definite, very passionate views, and so we got some positive comments. We've gotten some negative comments, and so I think we'll be taking that all into consideration. This is one of those discussions that we really need to have with everyone involved in the market, because there are a lot of considerations. We need to understand how people are thinking about the data that they need to use, and how people who might be competing consolidators, how they might think about what would make them decide that they want to participate in that capacity and whatnot. And there are a lot of intricacies of the proposal that I think we need to get commentary on as well. For example, consolidation is something that a lot of people just do, and so we have to be careful in the way we write our rules to make sure that we're not stopping people from doing something that they would normally have done for fear that they're going to run afoul of our rule. So there are a lot of nuances that we're trying to think about and take into consideration.
So I think I'm pretty sure we're going to get into the weeds over the course of the day today, and hear from Brett and others, and probably hear quite a range of opinions on the proposal. But I'm hoping that you can drill down a little bit and share your thoughts on, how the proposal would address the three big themes, right? Content of data, speed at which it gets disseminated to the public, and then obviously concerns around competition.
Right. So in terms of content, we've tried to broaden it to include more depth of book, and I think that's really important for people. Over time, I think we've seen that people are really needing more than the SIP. So in terms of getting more depth, so that's something that we wanted to do. And I haven't gotten through the whole comment file, but my initial impressions are that a lot of people think that is correct, and that the SIP could be a lot more useful if it were a lot more comprehensive. And then in terms of speed, I mean, that's something that people obviously have been paying so that they could get higher speed data. And there has been work on the part of the SIPs to try to improve the speed with which people get the speed and the stability of the SIP feed. So I think that those have been positive efforts. But I think there's still concerns, and that's something that we hope that we can address through some of the changes that are made by this proposal. And then obviously on the competition side, the competing consolidator idea is a way to introduce competition that we're thinking about. This is such a difficult area, and it's one that I'm waiting for that economist to come in with a silver bullet to say this is how you regulate a market like this, and that is a silver bullet that we haven't gotten yet. So I'm still waiting if anyone has the perfect solution. But because it is a difficult area where there's a lot of money at stake, and there's the people in this audience are really concerned about getting the data they need to serve their clients well, and getting it fast enough, and getting it in comprehensive enough. And so that's what we're trying to address.
So it is obviously a very complicated proposal and a complicated comment file, and it'll take a while for the Commission to work through it. But I wonder if we're not going to get the perfect economist coming along, right, with a perfect solution, and so given that the perfect may be the enemy of the good, can you give us a sense of timing or what you'd like to see happen in terms of how this gets to the finish line?
Well, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for moving forward with this. Certainly, we've asked people to spend the time to consider a very lengthy proposal and to provide commentary on it. And so I would like us to take that and move forward with something. And I can tell you that the chairman is someone who works folks at the commission quite hard, even though we're on work from home mode at the commission too. He inspires people to work hard, and so I'm hopeful that we will make relatively quick progress with it. Now, again, we got a lot of comments. There may be things that we look at and we say, all right, well, this is a change that we thought might be good, but we need to think about it some more, and we need to table it for now. So it may be that we don't move forward with everything, but it's a little bit hard for me to know because I think we're really still processing this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And there's another sort of big Reg NMS 2.0 development that's related, and that goes to the governance model surrounding the SIP. And the Commission has ordered the exchanges and FINRA to propose a new equity market data plan to replace the 3 existing plans that govern the operation of SIP feeds. And the so-called governance order is also meant to address conflicts in how the SROs manage the SIPs. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see this this model fitting in with the infrastructure proposal, and how they're interrelated, whether both of them sort of have to happen, and whether both of them have to happen within the same time frame.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that will determine what happens with the governance part of what we're doing is obviously there's litigation, and so that limits what I can say for one, but it also could affect the timing, and so that is something that we're obviously aware of. But this again has been a concern that a lot of people have raised for a long time. That there is concern about getting more representation on the governance to make sure that you have broader viewpoints, not just the viewpoints of the data providers, but that you've got viewpoints of people who are actually using the data. And so that's something that we're looking at and thinking about. Again, there's strong views on that as well, and so we'll see where things proceed. I do think that we didn't put those two together. They're two different pieces, and so I think those two pieces don't necessarily need to move in lockstep, and that's why we didn't propose them, put them out there in lockstep either.
How do you view sort of more broadly the Commission's role in SIP governance?
Again, I mean, I think given the litigation, I probably can't comment too much on that. So the goal is to get this in a place where people who have a stake are able to weigh in, and that's where we're really trying to get things. We recognize the data is very important to lots of people, and we want to make sure that people are getting the data they need to trade for themselves or for their clients. And people have a best execution obligation. We want to make sure that they're getting the data that they have to meet that obligation, and that they're meeting it not in a way that's just, I sometimes worry that people are looking for an easy way to meet that best execution obligation, and it's not an easy obligation. If it were easy, we could spell it out very clearly. This is what it means to get best execution. But when someone is trading client money, there's an obligation to think through the complexities. That's why you're being hired, to do this. And so we want to make sure that people have the tools they need so that they can really fulfill that obligation. And so that's why we've been exploring this through these different avenues, because we do think it's important. That said, I think it's important to emphasize too that our markets, equity markets function really well for retail investors, and I think we shouldn't lose that as we consider some of these nuances, right? I'm someone who doesn't love the order protection rule. I think it constrains people in ways that they shouldn't be constrained, and it also I think has led to some strange developments in the way that the market has evolved. But again, even I, with that criticism, will say I still think our equity markets work really well for retail investors. So we have to keep things in perspective too.
So the two initiatives that we've just been talking about are two that you've supported. And let's maybe switch gears and talk about one that you have opposed. You dissented from the Commission's recent amendments to the NMS plan that governs the CAT, the Consolidated Audit Trail. And these amendments use financial penalties to sort of finally implement the CAT. And you've argued that maybe the whole project should be scrapped entirely. So I'd be interested in hearing what your concerns are with the CAT and whether there's an alternative in your view that could better achieve the Commission's goal. And if you could also maybe just tell us what you think the Commission's goal or goals are in connection with the CAT.
Well, the CAT has been a long time in the making, and I think it's been a headache for a lot of people, and it's been extremely expensive for lots of people. But it came out of the desire after the flash crash to really understand what had happened and to be able to reconstruct the market events of that day. And that's understandable. We should be able to reconstruct market events. That is, as a regulator, it really helps us to figure out whether there are things we need to change in the way we regulate the markets. So I think that goal is a noble goal, but over time it morphed and it became much more of the goal of getting it's a tool for enforcement now. And so it's the idea as well, you need to have real-time access to everything that's going on in the markets, to every order in the markets. And that kind of, we're able to do our enforcement job now. We do it using blue sheets, and firms are under an obligation to provide us information when we ask them for it. And they provide us tons of information with blue sheeting. Can there be improvements? Yes, we have brought cases where where firms have not complied with their blue sheeting obligations well. And so we can continue to work on that front and to work to make sure that that process works better. But the notion that we have to set up a massive database to track everyone's trading, it raises very obvious concerns about cybersecurity, just that people will find that to be a very attractive database to attack and will go after people's personal information. There have been steps taken. I think Chairman Clayton has made it a priority to try to take steps to protect people's data. But nevertheless, I think that target remains attractive, and it's a very difficult task to try to build protections around it. And then I have a concern, which is sort of more of a liberty concern, that I don't think that someone who's not suspected of doing anything wrong should be followed around in the marketplace, whether it's a drugstore at the corner of the block, or whether it's your trading activity. I just don't think that's something that people should feel that is going to be watched. I mean, people will make all kinds of judgments about you based on your trading. And again, people have good intentions. I don't think that anyone at the SEC is thinking, oh, I'm going to use this to monitor my fellow citizens' activities. But well-intentioned projects like this can sometimes turn into things that don't work out well. We see unintended consequences. Just as with Reg NMS, intentions were good, but we got a lot of unintended consequences. And so it's better to think ahead of time, what are those consequences? Do we really, as a society, think this is okay for this kind of surveillance to be happening? And if we don't, let's stop it. Let's pull out the retail piece of this. But a lot of people say, well, we spent all this money, and so we want to move forward. But throwing good money after bad isn't the answer either.
And I definitely think that we're all much more attuned to the misuse of our data and our private information than we ever were. So that's an interesting perspective. So we only have a couple of minutes left, but I would like to ask you how you think about competition. We talked about it in the context of the infrastructure proposal, but how you think about it in trading more generally. And there continue to be so many new entrants and trading venues, entrants to the markets. So whether it be new exchanges, dark pools, algo providers, other types, what are your views on how competition has developed in the markets? And I know you're a huge proponent of competition, and so I'm especially interested in hearing your views on where do you see risk.
Well, I think it's an exciting time in the markets in that there are new entrants, and even the existing participants in the market are constantly innovating and coming up with new ways to do things. So I think that's great. I think that leads to the fact that we do have markets that work really well, even during times of stress, as we talked about at the beginning. But there is a risk, and I think you're right to highlight that and think about it. Algorithms work great until they don't work well, and so I think a lot of people worry about something really terrible happening when something goes wrong in that area, and that's led to some different suggestions about how to approach that problem. I don't think that we can get to a place where someone has to come to us and say, hey, this is the algorithm we want to use. Can you approve it for us? That is not the solution. We've seen some pretty spectacular problems in the past, and it's led to firm failures, which I think is the right result. You want to have the incentive be with the firm to make sure that they're paying attention to what their algorithms are doing. And so you want that to be the disciplining mechanism. But we also have tools like we have Reg SCI, which is one tool that helps us to make sure that people are thinking through the technology and making sure that they're putting in proper protections. So that can be helpful. But again, thinking about who should be subject to Reg SCI, that's not an easy question, and it's one that I often am concerned about, because I'm concerned about baking in technologies that we think are good when, as the market is innovating and competing with one another, they're coming up with better solutions. So I think that market competition can actually be a good risk manager too, but we obviously have a role to play at the SEC.
Well, I think that is a great point for us to end on. Our time is up with that. I think really interesting perspective. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on these very important issues to the buy side.